In this short video, as an introduction to AI tokens, we're going to be covering from a beginner's perspective what AI tokens actually are, consider some of the implications of that when you're using things like Claude and ChatGPT, because at the end of the day, we want to know why it's important to know what a token is. And at the same time, start to understand asking better questions around tokens and AI. And as you realize, just understanding what an AI token is means you're going to open the world of AI and asking better questions that is going to make you just a more intelligent and more informed person when it comes to AI. And with the way that AI is affecting all of us, whether it's in our daily life or in our jobs, it just is a good thing to know and educate yourself on, because who knows what's coming down the road. Really simply, to define an AI token, it is really just a measure of volume when it comes to characters that you're putting into a model, LLM, a large language model. And these are things like ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, Llama, all these other things. So an AI token is actually just breaking down the text that you put into a query that you put into a model. You can think of it as AI breaking down your words into smaller pieces that for some reason it seems to better understand, because that's how it's programmed to take in your information. And an AI token is on average 4 characters long. So if we took a word like Monday, Monday, that's 6 letters, that would probably be about 2 tokens, thinking that the first 4 characters would be the first token and the second 2 would be the final second token. And I want to mention here that this is strictly an average, so it's not a hard and fast rule. Actually, the word Monday, or really familiar words that these models are programmed to use, may simply just be 1 token, because the program is so used to those words, it doesn't need to break them down into smaller pieces in order to interpret them. So something like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday might actually only be 1 token. Well, on average, these tokens are about 4 characters long. The reason this is powerful to know is because ultimately a token is just measuring the volume of information and work that AI is doing. And one of the ways that you want to understand AI, or AI even wants to understand you so that it can bill you, is the volume of work it's doing. So in the context of AI and tokens, it's also useful to understand that not every token is the same. So when you're inputting information into a model, this would be an input token. As you might imagine, or at least guess, it's much cheaper to ask a question than to get back an intelligent answer. So input tokens are actually a lot less valuable, or in other words, output tokens are a lot more valuable than input tokens. And on average, they say an output token is about 3 to 10 times as valuable as an input token. So from a cost perspective, you can think about an output token being more expensive. So when it comes to token, it's not that there's just one AI token. Actually, there's different kinds of tokens. They may measure the same thing, but they may have different values depending on how they're being used. So you can think of them in different colors, a little bit maybe like you have poker chips or tokens at an arcade. The least valuable, the lower valuable ones are your inputs, because they're just going to break down the question you're asking and then interpret that for the model. And then your more expensive ones are your output tokens, because the model then has to come up with an answer, do some research, put it all together and iteratively respond to your query. The other thing to think about is with AI tokens, actually there's input tokens, output tokens, and then there's just a different variation in tokens that you have for different models. With Claude, for example, Opus at the moment is the most advanced model, and that would have a higher priced or more costly token associated with it. If you're using one of the more higher volume but less intelligent models like Haiku, I believe, then that would actually be a different token of lower value. So again, you're introducing these different tokens, different color, different value tokens. They're not all in one and the same, even though they might be measuring the same thing. They may all be measuring the character length, an average length of 4 characters of what you're inputting and what is being output. But they have different values depending on where you're using them on these different models. And of course, there's going to be some variation between the different providers, OpenAI's ChatGPT, Anthropic's Claude, and Google's Gemini, and Meta's Llama. The reason this is important is when you're using things like Claude, actually you have a certain prescribed amount of tokens that they give you. I think they say it on average it's about 40,000 to use in Claude when you're asking it its questions. So, and of course, it's about a case of getting the balance right between not putting a question into a model that's so vague the output is not that useful, but also not putting in a prompt or query that is so detailed you use up too many tokens. It's a case of putting in and being really efficient with the prompts that you put into AI, such that the output is also useful, because you're being measured not only on the queries you put in and the complexity of the query you put into the model, but of course you're being measured on the output. So if you're able to define the output even more, you're going to make more efficient use of the free tokens you get from something like Claude. And of course, when you're paying for these subscriptions, then you're just going to be more efficient with the subscription in terms of the amount of tokens you have. Secondly, if you're working with this in a more professional setting, you may want to start to think about information flows and model uses. If the most intelligent models are more expensive and you need to do a simple task that doesn't require that much thinking from an AI perspective, well, maybe that means you're going to be using a lower tier, less intelligent model that's less expensive. Also, you may want to think about information flows. You may want to think about the fact that, does this prompt need to be this long? Does this information need to go into an AI model? And what is the output that we get? And is that too expensive? Again, by understanding tokens, you just start to ask more intelligent questions. The other thing to think about is, let's say you're a free user and you're in a chat. Well, when you're in a chat, AI is not just looking at and processing the last message you sent. In order for it to be an intelligent piece of software, it's also keeping a memory and a log of all the things you typed before that. So as your conversation progresses, the cost of that conversation tends to increase, because the amount of memory and processing that AI has to do every time you ask it a question to go back and think about what it was asked previously, so it's kept in its memory, so it doesn't seem like it's completely starting from scratch every time you send it a new message, means you're consuming more tokens as the chat goes on. And by knowing this, you may decide to open a new chat when you start to ask something in ChatGPT that is nothing to do with the previous chat. Again, so you're saving tokens because it's no longer using tokens to process the memory of things you've asked it before. Ultimately, in a professional setting and at home, you're going to start to think about the cost-benefit analysis. If you get to a point where you're using up all your free usage and you may want to pay for it, you also want to be efficient with the credits now you're getting. On the professional side, you just know that as soon as you start paying for AI and creating agents, creating workflows and data flows, things can start to get expensive really quickly, and you want to be on top of those costs. And you want to do the cost benefit analysis, because it's not free. And that's the illusion we have by so many of us being able to jump in and use Claude, ChatGPT, all of these models, at least initially, for free. That's not the case when you start to use this in a professional setting, because of course we need to be charged for all the cost of these things, the cost to develop the software, the cost of these servers to be running and for them to be cooled down, and all the other associated costs with running AI, and the environmental costs, which is probably a much bigger topic for the future. The last thing I wanted to talk about here is the nuance between actually different providers. So for instance, Anthropic's Claude actually does give you in the free quota an amount of tokens it wants you or thinks you should use. And once you reach that, then obviously it starts to cut you out and you don't have access till the next day. But that's not to say they're all built the same. When you come to something like ChatGPT, it's actually more restrictive from a messages perspective. And I read somewhere that it's about 5 messages it has in a certain particular window that you get to ask, and then it's just going to cut you off. So it's not as simple as going, I have free tokens, I need to be really efficient, etc., etc. Maybe when you're using something like ChatGPT, actually it makes more sense to be more descriptive and maybe use a little bit more on the token side in your messages, because ultimately you're going to be cut off around 5 messages. Whereas in something like Claude, where it might not be message dependent, at the time of this video, I don't believe it is, but things are just changing all the time. Well, then in case you may want to think about it more from a prompt and text token perspective. Ultimately, you need to have a look at whichever models you're looking at to see what is the most efficient way. But now understanding what a token is, like I said, you can ask way more intelligent questions and be at the forefront of what is going on with AI. If you enjoyed this video, then please hit like, subscribe, anything you want to show me that it actually added some value so I can create more content like it. And I shall see you in the next video.